Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Delighted to get to be here with you on a Friday afternoon. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us on this Friday afternoon. I think we got a really good show for you to end the work week. Jimmy Akin will be here tomorrow. I guess some people will, because for the 4th of July is on Tuesday, so maybe for some people this is going to be like a 4-day weekend. Not for us. We'll be here on Monday. I'm not complaining. I'm just informing. Before we head off into that long weekend for many people, we do have a very good show. That second hour, it'll be open forum, as I said, with Jimmy Akin. And this hour, I got to say, I'm really happy to welcome him back. We haven't had Gary Michuta on for a long time. He's the author of, for Catholic Answers, several things, including Revolt Against Reality, Fighting the Enemies of Sanity and Truth from the Serpent to the State, a book that must be read if you want to understand these times that we live in. Revolt Against Reality. He also wrote Hostile Witnesses, How the Enemies of the Church Prove Christianity, The Case for the Deuterocanon, Arguments and Evidence, and Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger, which you hear us give away from time to time because we get a lot of people who call, and that is their question. Why are Catholic Bibles bigger? Or why did Catholics put extra books in the Bible? Or why did Protestants take books out of the Bible? And Gary knows that story better than probably just about anybody you know. He's also the host of Hands On Apologetics on Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and he's got a new book about how can we trust what we read in the Gospels about Jesus? How do we know that we actually have an accurate picture of what Jesus did? Gary Michuta, thank you for being here with us.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Cy.
Yeah, congratulations on another book. Your library is getting to be the library of the books you've written. It's almost at Trent Horn dimensions now.
Oh, no, nothing like that. But at least it's like a kind of intro shelf to the Trent Horn shelf.
Yeah, right. All right, a baby Trent Horn shelf.
That's right.
So what got you thinking about this? And by the way, if you want to ask about this, about why we would think anything that we know about Jesus is trustworthy, you're very welcome to call 888-318-7884. Anybody is welcome to call and ask those questions, 888-318-7884. So what brought you to write this book about, did you have questions yourself, or is this a question that you run into as an apologist?
A little bit of both. Yeah, it's first, I find it a really fascinating area of apologetics. You know, the question of could the Gospels have lied, the veracity of the Gospels? Because it reminds me of like, those old shows, the courtroom shows where you really do have to make a case for something and weigh the evidence. And the other thing, too, is there's a lot of really great books on vindicating the Gospels, but they all, nearly all of them are written by evangelicals. Nearly all of them vindicate why our text today is identical to the original. And they also argue about how close the Gospels were written to that time. And they also look at extra biblical evidence and show how that squares with the Gospels, which is very good. But I always found it very thin, Cy, because it only gets you so far. And what I kept noticing with skeptics, atheists, is they would ask some really good questions that weren't answered by that kind of technique. Like, well, how do you know it's just not all fabrication? It could be a very early one, or they embellished or, just exaggerated certain things. How do we know that didn't happen? And the other thing, too, is even if you could establish that the text we have is the same and it was written close and all that, how do you know what the true meaning of it is? It's kind of meaningless because, we have a text, but everybody has their own guess on what the text means. What's the point at the end of the day?
Yeah, and that would be part of knowing what Christ really taught.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what, as a Catholic, we can bring a lot to the table in this discussion, and that's basically what the book is. That, and also a whole bunch of cool things I found in my research over the years.
The Gospel Truth, how we can know what Christ taught. It's just out this spring from Gary Michuta. It's the latest book from Gary Michuta. Can I just start then with the most basic question? How do we know that the people who wrote the Gospels made an accurate recording of what Jesus said?
Yeah. There's some things in my book, I follow your book, Cy, because the tactic you used was to kind of pique people's curiosity, right?
Yeah.
And your book with Jesus, which by the way is an awesome book. You should plug that as well. Um,
Thank you. I will plug that. A Teacher of Strange Things, who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. But thank you, Gary. I love it when people invite
yes.
me to plug my own book on my own show.
Yeah, there you go. And yeah, but I love your method though, because it's like, yeah, what about that? So what I do is what I show in the book is that Jesus, it's almost as if he's divine, chooses Jewish culture to give his message in, which already had a mechanism for passing on large amounts of detailed information accurately from one generation to another. And so the first part of my book, I show how he taps into that mechanism. And so that lends up, just another grain of sand on one side of the scale. Okay, that lends towards it being authentic. Another thing, too, is that the New Testament Gospels show evidence of being formatted. Now, what I mean by that is that, there's certain things that we know. We may have heard it once when we were kids, and like we can recite lyrics of songs or poems or rhymes, 30, 40, 50 years later, word for word accuracy. And the reason is it's formatted. It has a certain rhyme, a certain rhythm. There's
Right.
certain things about these things that kind of embed in our memory. And you see the same thing in the Gospels, that there are all these different layers of mnemonic formatting, where uh, if you weren't aware that they're doing this, it just sounds like Bibleese, like, oh, well, that's how people talked in the first century. But actually, a lot of it is this kind of formatting where things could be memorized and then recited with accuracy. And some of it's there, and you can see it in your English translation. Some of it you can only see in the Greek, which is the oldest manuscripts we have. And curiously enough, some of it is buried under the Greek because there's areas where the Greek speaks as if it's a Hebrew or Aramaic person speaking in the Greek language. And so, I asked in my book, if you're going to fabricate something, first, why would you have all these mechanisms for memory embedded in it? I mean, a
Right.
lot of them.
Right.
And the other one is, if you're going to do that, why would you hide it from your original readers, right? Because the original readers were Greeks, or at least they read Greek. And, if you're going to try to
Mm-hmm.
pass it off as authentic, why would you hide the very thing that you're using to pass it off? So that's the first stage. It's like, these gospels are strange. They're definitely not legendary accounts. They're not fabrications. Or if they are fabrications, it's like the most overly engineered fabrication in human history. Okay. When you
Right.
look at all the different layers.
Right. So you can when you look at the say the Gospel of Mark, the very first gospel. I don't
Mhm.
know, 20, 25, 30 years pass between the time of Christ's leaving this earth to the completion of that gospel. But you can see that parts of that gospel, which is in many ways, it's not like it doesn't read just like a single. It does read as a single story arc, but it also reads as almost like trailers. Like here's a clip, here's a clip, here's a
Yeah.
clip, and that you can see in the individual clips, which we call the gospel reading at Sunday Mass very often, that they're structured so that somebody who spoke Aramaic, for example, would be able to remember that snippet.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yep. And even in Greek too. Uh, the gospel, or Jesus, when he's giving these discourses, even he does it in the form of Hebrew poetry. Again, you have rhyme and rhythm. There's certain beat patterns. There's certain, with
Right.
Hebrew, the interesting thing, it isn't rhyming words, but it's rhyming meanings. So each line, for example, one line will state something and the other one might expand on it. That's one way. Or the second line may contrast it, you know. Uh, Many are called, but few are chosen, right? So one's positive, the other one's negative, and there's all these different variations of
Hmm.
rhyme, Hebrew poetry being evolved. And so even if you forget part of it, if you just know, just like when I say Mary had a little lamb, you could fill in the rest because the rest has a beat like da 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 da, right? Mary had a
Right.
little lamb, da 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 da
Right.
da, and you know that you know, you could reconstruct the part you forget based on, just a portion of what's being said.
That's so interesting what you said about the phrase, many are called, but few are chosen, because it's almost an unforgettable phrase. Like once you've heard that little pattern, and Christ himself does this over and over again in the way that he speaks to people, that's a kind of unforgettable way that he said that. Not unforgettable just because, that's the greatest thing that was ever said, although much of it is, but because he speaks in patterns. He has patterns of speech that are easily remembered.
Yeah. This is one of the coolest things that I ran across. But this idea of, certain portions of the New Testament Gospels are, have this Hebrew Aramaic thing. In the Benedictus, in Gospel of Luke, there's a couple of lines that's really interesting. It says, to perform mercy promised to our fathers, to remember his holy covenant, the oath in which he swore to our father Abraham. Okay, so in English, that's nice, but I don't see where there's any memory devices. Now, when you look at it with a view to a Hebrew original, what you find is the word to show mercy is Hanan in Hebrew, which is the same root as Yohanan, which is John, the name John. To remember is Zakar in Hebrew, which is the same root as Zachariah. And to swear an oath is Shabbat in Hebrew, which is the root of Elisheba, Elizabeth. So in those three lines of the Benedictus, you happen to have the roots of the three names of the main progenitors in the narrative.
Oh,
right?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you didn't know Hebrew, it would just be the lines are just there. But if you're familiar with the Hebrew backing, you can remember those lines like that. You just remember John, Zechariah, Elizabeth.
888-318-7884 is the number. The book is called The Gospel Truth, How We Can Know What Christ Taught. So we start then, before I go to the first break, I just want to, you've already given us one of the ways we know what Christ taught is that we can see that these things, before they were ever written down, were given in a form that was meant to be memorized to a people who had a habit of memorizing things in just this very way. So that if you can identify that, you can say, well, this looks awfully reliable, because why would somebody who made it up and wrote it down 25 years later write it in a Greek way that pretends to use all these Aramaic mnemonic devices?
Yeah. That at least it lays the groundwork, right?
Yeah.
But you could still say, okay, well, maybe at the very beginning that was all fabricated. How do you know Jesus actually did miracles and the things that are claimed in the Gospels? And that's like the next step where, I have a section with dare to verify.
Well, let's get into a little bit of that when we come back. All right?
Okay. Sounds great.
The great Gary Michuta is our guest. He's got another book, and it's a beauty, The Gospel Truth, How We Can Know What Christ Taught. What an important question, and a strangely neglected one. We'll get into more of it with Gary right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
If you've never been to EWTN's free family celebration, this is your year. Your EWTN family is waiting for you where it all began in Birmingham, Alabama. Join us Saturday, August 26th as we celebrate Mother Angelica's love for the Eucharist and mark the centennial year of Mother's birth. For more information on this free event, visit EWTN.com/family celebration. We want to see you there.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Gary Machuda is our guest. The primary way you probably hear Gary Machuda's name here on this show is why Catholic Bibles are bigger. There's a new and improved edition of it a year or two or three ago. I'm not exactly sure. Since COVID, I don't know how time passes in weird ways for me now. But you probably hear us give that book away. But Gary's got lots of wonderful books, including Hostile Witnesses, about how the early enemies of Christianity actually proved Christianity. Revolt Against Reality, one that I just highly, highly recommend if you want to understand the moment we are living in now. It's not just that people are losing their way. It's that there's a revolt against the real world going on, and Gary highlights how that's happening and how Christianity is a remedy for that. And now he's got this wonderful new book, The Gospel Truth, How We Can Know What Christ Taught. Because one of the things, Gary, that we get in the modern world is not, that's not true. But like you make a statement and people don't say, that's not true. They go, well, how do you know that? And how do you know that for sure? There's this turn away from struggling over what's true and what's false to struggling over how can you even know any of it in the first place. And your claim here is that we can know what the man Jesus taught.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, I talk about the dare to verify, right? Let me give you an example. You go to the bank with a check for $5 or $10, my usual pay for the
So
month.
your paycheck for the week. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. They run it through. They give me the money. It's no problem, right? But if I went to the bank with a paycheck like yours, like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, right?
Exactly. I got to get verified every time. They're like, we got to put a hold on this for a couple weeks. Your salary is so huge. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they got to check your ID. You got to go there. You're not going
Right.
to get the money. The reason is because a check that amount is a risk for the bank. They could be out all that money if the check bounces. So they're going to do everything they can to minimize the risk and double check to verify that the funds are there. Well, you know what? If you think of that analogy and apply it to the Gospels, what you find is the claims about Jesus are like checks that are being written. And these are huge checks, right? These are claims about Jesus raising people up from the dead, about Jesus being the one God of Israel, Jesus suffering, dying, and rising from the dead. These are, millions of dollars in check promissory notes in a sense.
Yeah.
So that raises the point, well, can it be verified, and did people verify it? So in the book, I go through and show that it would be very hard to perpetrate a hoax, given that Jesus did this in front of multiple audiences that were unstaged. There were skeptics there. I set that table. But I think the coolest part is it really would have been incumbent upon the earliest people who became Christians to verify whether the stories in the Gospels are true. And one of the funnest parts of the book is I find things in the Gospels that kind of are dares to the audience to check out stuff, right? So let me give you one of my favorite examples.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. The bread of life discourse, John 6, right? Jesus says, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And he says it multiple times in John 6. And, we're familiar with this as Catholic apologists, because it's very striking. This is the only discourse where Jesus actually loses disciples. Well, if you're reading the discourse, you find something that's really curious. And this always bugged me. Right after Jesus says this over and over again, it's almost like the narrator jumps in. And it's like those old broadcasts that they used to have. We interrupt this program to give a very important message, right?
Yes.
Then they tell their spiel, and then now back to your regularly scheduled program. Well, like right after Jesus says this, the narrator, John, jumps in and he says something like, these things Jesus said while preaching in the synagogue of Capernaum. Now back to your regularly scheduled broadcast. It just goes on as if nothing happened, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, why did you have to jump in and give this little bit of information, And scholars will say, well, maybe the discourse was two discourses and it was stitched together and stuff like that. But I think there's a much better and simpler explanation, and that is right after Jesus says these words, the original readers of John would have said, did he really say that? because think about it, his own disciples leave him.
Right, right.
So John has to jump into the text and say, he said it at this particular location with the people that go to that synagogue. And it's almost like, I double dog dare you to go to the synagogue.
Go ask him.
And check it.
Yeah, right.
So he gets the location, the people. And since, becoming a Christian in the first century and even afterwards, regardless if you're Jewish or Gentile, it would have been a social death sentence. I mean, and maybe even a literal one. I mean, you could be beaten, you could be kicked out of your home. You have a lot to lose, right? So there's already this preemptive need to verify. But then you have these challenges, in the Gospels that,
Right.
like John stepping in is saying, hey, he did that in this location right here. Well, check it out.
Outside the Gospels, Paul says 500 people saw it. That also seems like kind of a. You can go ask them. Like
you said some are still living.
Yeah. So okay, so this also tends toward the veracity. Like if you're giving the means of verifying the sayings, or at least trying to give the means that so someone could verify the sayings, this would suggest you're not just making things up. In other words.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it would have been incumbent upon them to check it out, and they did. For example, at the beginning of Luke's gospel, that's why Luke wrote the gospel, was to essentially, he says, he verified everything. He checked everything new, and he puts in the orderly sequence for a guy named Theophilus who was being catechized. And so we know verification happened. For example, Luke verified.
Yeah.
You can also see that at the end of John as well, that, there's a second ending to John in chapter 21. And it says, we know that his words are true. You have to say, okay, how do you know his words are true? Well, either they were there or they verified it, right?
Yeah.
Because this mysterious we jumps in there and says,
right.
We know this is true.
Again, 888-318-7884. And I am going to go to callers. I just have to ask about one more thing before I do, because I think this is going to stick in the mind of the person listening who might be skeptical. And when you talk about those big checks that need to be verified, the claim that Jesus did miracles, and really, in the Gospels, the claim is that he basically is going everywhere doing miracles. Like the Matthew says he healed all who came to him at one point. They're not saying, well, yeah, one time in this area, that's way out of the way, out in the country, like UFO stories always are. They're saying right in front of everybody, he did miracles. This is a big fat check, and the miracles are not. They're not card tricks. They're guys who were blind from birth, or guys who sat at a pool and couldn't walk for 30 years, or children who were dead, and got back up. So really, Gary, to the skeptic, is there a way to say, well, you can trust that Jesus did these things?
Yeah. That and, a lot of it's just common sense. Some of it's done in big cities, and, in big cities, it's easy to be anonymous, and,
right.
Even big things can happen and people don't notice it. A lot of them were done in smaller towns. And if you ever grew up in a small town, since there's not a lot happening in those towns, whenever something even marginally interesting happens, it's remembered for generations,
Right.
Yeah. So,
so if Jairus' daughter was actually dead and got up, this is not something they're going to forget about. This is something that's part of that town's memory for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. In fact, there's an early church father called Quadratus. Okay. He's writing, I think, in the 120s. We have a fragment from him. And he makes a really important point. He says, some of these people that Jesus raised from the dead or cured, it's not like they disappeared. They continue to live. So, Jairus' daughter, for example, it wasn't just that one-time moment. She's continuing to be around,
Right.
And it's especially for miraculous healings where the condition is the man born blind. people would know him because they've been around him all his life. They know his situation. They know the extent of whatever's afflicting him. And so, there's this body of data that they could bring to so that when he's instantaneously healed, they could verify that this is something dramatic has happened,
Which is maybe why you don't have a lot of early literature of people going, Jesus never did these miracles, because they really couldn't make that claim. There were people all over who had seen it and were even the beneficiaries of those miracles.
Yep.
All
Yeah,
right.
like hostile witnesses.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with more Gary Michuta on Catholic Answers Live. Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history and the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I hate to take even a few seconds away from the great Gary Michuta. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884. If you've ever had how do you know Jesus said that? How do you know Jesus did that? How do you really know Jesus meant that? If you've got those kind of questions, this hour is for you, and I want to invite you to call 888-318-7884. But I also have to read this little sheet that Carrie gives me. This weekend, 25% off every purchase over $25 when you use the promo code USA25. That's right, USA25 at checkout. Whatever you get at Catholic Answers, if it sums up to more than $25 or more, you can use that promo code USA25 at shop.catholic.com and get 25% off your entire order. And that includes, great books like Revolt Against Reality or Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger, or any of the great books we have over there at shop.catholic.com. I didn't ask you the question about the meaning, but there is that question. I mean, one of the basic critiques of Christianity is, look, the same people read a Bible passage, and 10 people read a Bible passage and come up with 10 different meanings for it. So that proves that's kind of given to us as a proof against Christianity as a reasonable religion. So, I mean, I asked you about how we can know what Jesus said or have any confidence that these were actually the words of Jesus. How can we have any confidence that he actually did miracles? But how can we have any confidence that the church is right when it interprets the meaning of what he said?
Yes. And this is fun. I was interviewed earlier this week by our good friend Pat Flynn. I believe you've had him on the show as well.
Love Pat Flynn, yeah.
Amazing guy.
Right.
Well, he brought up that his 9-year-old asked the question of, how do we know that this stuff's true? It's not a lie. And so he asked me the question, how would you explain to a 9-year-old, how we can know it's true. And and it was funny because it's like that fits perfectly with my book because it really does get very simple. For example, let's do a thought experiment. We go in our Wayback Machine. Okay.
All right,
back
Mr.
to
Peabody.
Yes, and you could be Mr. Peabody the Great, and I'll be Sherman.
Okay, Sherman.
And so we go to first century church. John the Apostle is the pastor.
Okay.
And during service, John is reading from his own gospel. He reads the Bread of Life discourse. He says that Jesus is talking about the Eucharist. Now, me being Sherman, I say, gee, Mr. Peabody, how do we know that Jesus really was speaking about the Eucharist, not just symbolically or something, right?
Yeah.
So you being Mr. Peabody the Great says, why don't we talk to him? So we go up to him, we ask him, how do you know that's the meaning of the text? Well, he says, well, Jesus told us that this is the meaning, and that's, I was inspired by the Holy Spirit to write my own gospel, and so that's the true meaning of the text. Now, we could, that's one way you can verify, but there's actually others. For example, we could ask the people in the congregation who also may have heard of Jesus or the other apostles, say, hey, are you familiar with this? Did you ever hear that this is connected with the Eucharist? And they should give us an answer, right? Now, let's say we're really skeptical. Let's go to the churches of the other apostles and ask them, John said this is about the Eucharist. Did Jesus really say this is Eucharistic? Now, if all these different places we check all have essentially the same answer, then multiple attestation, kind of coalescing into a single answer points to a single point of origin, right? So then we could say, yeah, okay, Jesus really did mean that when he said X, right?
Yeah.
Now, me being the skeptical Sherman says, Mr. Peabody, what about, a generation later when the apostles are dead? So we go in our Wayback Machine. This time we go to, let's say, Ignatius of Antioch's church. Okay. Ignatius was the bishop, 2 bishops after Peter. Okay. So he's preaching on John's gospel. He says it's Eucharistic. We go to him. How do you know? He says, well, my predecessor and I, we were taught by the apostles. They said this is what it means. Okay. Then we can go to the congregation, say, hey, you were here when the predecessor was here. Did he ever preach on this? Right. And then if we're really, really skeptical, we could go to other churches that were established by the apostles and ask them. And again, if you have multiple attestations coalescing in a single answer, that points towards authenticity. So you can take this just step by step, generation by generation, say the Irenaeus of Lyon, who is a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, do the same kind of thought experiment. And actually, our ability to verify actually grows, right? Because now you can talk to congregants, you could look at hymns, you could look at liturgies, you could talk to people who knew those people.
Right.
And so instead of verification becoming harder as the centuries go on, it actually becomes easier and easier to verify when an innovation occurs. Because if something's true, it should be traced as far back as you can go, so antiquity.
Yeah.
It should be found in all places, which is called ubiquity. And there should be a general consensus that all points to the same point. And antiquity, ubiquity, and consensus is the rule of St. Vincent of Lorraine, right? So so we can know the meaning through this kind of exercise. And you know what's cool, Si, is in the early church, people did that. Like, there's a father we don't know a lot about, but his name is Hegesippus, who actually did that. He went to different churches and started comparing different teachings. And, Irenaeus of Lyon in book 3, chapter 3, at the beginning of that, he mentions that everywhere around the world, they believe the same thing. Well, how does he know that? Well, he lives in modern day France, was Gaul, but he came from probably the Smyrna, where Polycarp was.
Turkey.
Yeah. So, he traveled. He should know. So you actually have that in the early church where people are actually verifying tradition, that is verifying the meaning of certain things and certain teachings.
This is I love that you just did that, because one of the afflictions of the modern kind of ahistorical mind, that is, we don't know our place in history. We don't know where we fit in history. We're kind of just almost creatures who are adrift from history. We're so disconnected from it that I think there are millions and millions of people who think that Jesus existed in such a dark and distant past that we don't have access to the apostles. Like, they would be amazed to know there are people who knew the Apostle John who then wrote down what the Apostle John, so that there's not a discontinuity. There's a very clear continuity, and you can name the people. You just name them, Ignatius, and you could have named more. You could have named Clement, who knew Peter, and wrote a very long letter. As a matter of fact, I think the longest letter in the ancient world Clement wrote, almost as long as the letters popes right now. So this sense that Jesus did not exist in a world that is completely opaque to us. We have the records of the people who lived at the very same time he lived were his contemporaries, and then the people who followed them and went to school with them, and tell us, I sat at the feet of John, and that's how I know this. That's, to me, such striking evidence in favor of Jesus against this modern mistake that thinks that the ancient world and the world of Jesus is opaque and so far away that we can't know it. We really can't know it.
Yeah, and if somebody innovates, let's say Arius in Alexandria, okay,
Yeah, right.
then that thought originates at a distant time, like the 4th century. It starts in a particular location, namely Alexandria, and it will be a minority position, at least initially, right?
Yeah.
Because it actually expands quite rapidly. But, so it's not only can we verify the truth of the meaning, but we can also identify innovations, and identifying innovation actually becomes easier and easier as you go through history.
Yeah, and being able to identify an innovation means that there is a constant teaching.
Yeah, right.
That's
exactly.
what verifies for us that there is a constant teaching, that you can look at what Arius taught and go, no, that's not consistent with what was taught from the time of the apostles.
Right. And that's why we name heresies after the heresy arc, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like that's the port of origin.
Yeah. And sometimes they were they were people that didn't mean to be heretics. Like Nestorius, I think, came back, didn't he? He repented of what's called Nestorianism.
Yeah.
Did he? I think he did.
I am. Now you're putting me on the spot.
I might have the wrong guy, but I might have the wrong guy. I do that sometimes, but So maybe Nestorius was the worst guy ever, and I'm sorry that I just tried to rehabilitate him. Bernadette in Nebraska, listening on EWTN.com. We're glad you're here, Bernadette. Go ahead with your question for Gary.
First of all, this is my first time calling in on Catholic Answers, and second of all, my first post was on Catholic Answers on Facebook, and I was a cradle Catholic and did my idiocy for 15 years, and I'm back in the faith.
Praise God.
I'm learning so much. I'm learning so much from Catholic Answers on Facebook. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. This is a perfect subject for me. Brant Petree's, I forget the name of the book, but he talks about reading John 6 daily, which I do most days, and I keep my Bible open to those pages and to read about the miracles. But the question is, a priest, I heard it directly in a daily mass, that the miracle was because everybody shared their food. And I'm just kind of trying to get better discernment on the motive, and maybe this isn't the right intention, but he's a little bit of a controversial priest, and there's been other things going on. So I'm just trying to understand, why would a priest even say this? There's the conspiracy theory that somebody said the Vatican has specifically implanted many priests to produce false doctrine and teach people the wrong way. The fruits of this priest, are exactly that. I'm not saying he is, but just to play the devil's advocate, why would somebody, specifically negate the miracle of the 5,000 and say the miracle was that they shared, unless there was malevolent intent?
Yeah. Well, you know what? We can't judge people's hearts or motives. So, Why they do it, who knows? Maybe it could be just a need to try to make the Gospels quote unquote relevant to the listeners. And since sharing would be relevant, he says that's the miracle. The problem is, I think the biggest problem is the text itself, because it simply doesn't say that, right? This is clearly a miracle that occurs, and it's an astounding miracle that occurs. In fact, right after, this is something I found really interesting, and I think this is a good defeater to this person who said the miracle is sharing. Okay. Jesus does a series of miracles right after it. If you look at the different Gospels, he does the multi-location of loaves, like Frank Sheet calls it. Then he walks on water. He calms the sea. The apostles' boat immediately arrives at shore. And what I love is, like, in Mark 6, it talks about what happens when they got to their destination, right? The apostles were really unsettled. So ask yourself the question, which one of those miracles really unsettled them? Was it the fact that their friend Jesus was walking on the water? Was it which, by the way, that's something only God does in the Old Testament? Or is it the fact that Jesus calms the sea and the weather obeys him? That's another thing only God does. Or the time miracle, where somehow the boat arrives at its destination like almost instantaneously. Which one of those were mind-blowing? Well, in Mark 6, verse 52, this is one of my favorite verses. It says that, I'll do in 51. It says, he got into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely astonished, or astounded. They did not understand the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened. So with all those incredible miracles that shows Christ's divinity that occurred, what was the one thing that blew the apostles' mind? It was the loaves, right? Now, if the miracle was these people shared with one another,
yeah,
I don't see how that could possibly square, right? That doesn't seem very mind-blowing to me. But what's really mind-blowing is like what Frank Sheet says in this miracle is that the self-same loaves that Jesus blessed and distributed was present in the stomachs of the 5,000 and in the 12 wicker baskets. So Jesus doesn't make more loaves. It doesn't say that in the narrative. Rather, those self-same loaves are multi-located. And that's what blew the apostles' mind.
Bernadette?
That was excellent. I wrote down the Mark verse. I'll review that. Very quickly, the same priest talks about that Adam and Eve and Noah are mythological, not historical. I know this isn't specifically about Jesus' words, but again, I'm just trying to better discern during homilies and just get better educated, like what is going on here? And how can you possibly, this priest is unapproachable. I've tried to speak to him and I just get radio silence because I'm a woman. And I'm just trying to better discern when things like this come up. I've pretty much learned to just disengage from it and just keep my head in the missile all the time through Mass, because there's been so many,
Can I just make a guess, Bernadette? I just want to make a guess, and you tell me if I'm wrong. This is not a young priest.
I've been a priest for 37 years.
Yeah.
When I asked him about something.
Yeah.
And
all right. So
his
you maybe are
10 feet behind his father. So women literally do not challenge him.
Yeah. I'm just saying, for 37 years, if he's been preaching this, he's not going to change it because you don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to better understand, just as an idiot Catholic, trying to get back to my faith and get better educated, which I'm doing thanks to you guys, how to better understand, like, what is going on, and is this person just completely lost? So it's more just to educate myself, so I have better discernment anytime when I talk to a priest or anybody spewing stuff that I know is not a fact, to give me better understanding of how to potentially engage or not engage, because it's deeply upsetting. I mean, I've heard things, on a Sunday Mass in front of, dozens of people. And I almost pulled a Joe Scheidler and stood up in the middle of Mass and just said something but I didn't. And so, for someone to try to suppose that Adam and Eve and Noah are not historical and mythological, how could that be any sort of benevolent intent?
Yeah, it's probably confusion. The church has spoken on this, and actually Jimmy Akin would be much better given all the documents. But essentially what the church says is these are real events that occurred, but it's telling history in a way that like normal historiography, modern historiography would. And so it could use elements from myths in order to flush out some special meaning in that. But the core of what it's reporting happened. And it could be that he just wasn't paying attention during that lesson. He heard the word,
or maybe he was, and he
read.
went to the seminary in 1970.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm trying to be careful, but yeah, that's another problem too.
Yeah.
But what you do for me, whenever I encounter this, is I offer it up for the conversion of the priest. Whatever suffering you endure, go in there and just learn about what the church teaches. And if you can, maybe form a Bible study or a study group from people within your church,
right,
and you can help educate them.
And I have to go to the break. It's a beautiful. Thank you for the good news that you have returned to the full practice of the faith. That's always good news for us, and I'm delighted to hear it. And the church continues to struggle in her encounter with modernity. It's been hundreds of years, and she's still trying to get her story straight in this struggle in modernity. And there's going to be some who prefer a modern explanation, even if it contradicts what the gospel is clearly trying to teach. And what can we do but have patience and leave it in the hands of the Lord and correct where a correction is appropriate. I do have to take a break. We'll be right back with more Gary Michuta on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It is one of the things, Gary Michuta is our guest, and he's got a new book called The Gospel Truth, How We Can Know What Christ Taught. And that word know is one that the modern world just hates that word, that you could know anything for certain, certainly moral things or religious things. No one's supposed to claim to know things. We're supposed to believe things but not know them. But we do know a great deal about Christ. We know because the gospel writers were reliable people. They belonged to a community of good-hearted people who wanted to communicate the truth, did not want to distort it, and were meticulous about preserving it because they knew that God had come among them as a man. Gary Michuta, our guest, has done a fine job of illustrating why you can know what Christ taught. But Gary, the apostles themselves must have heard people saying, "Oh, this is myths that you're." I mean, this priest that we just heard about from Bernadette is not unique in the history of the church. I mean, it's unique how it has assumed a position of dominance in the church in some places, but in the modern era. But they actually were quite explicit about the fact of them being eyewitnesses and not sharing myths was an important detail that you should attend to.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite passages, except I can never remember if it's 1st or 2nd Peter.
I'm 71% sure it's 2nd Peter.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm going to go with
We'll go with that. We'll go with that.
Yeah, the cleverly devised myths.
Yeah, we didn't follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power or the glory of Jesus. And it talks about the Mount of Transfiguration, which, by the way, there were only 3 there, right, outside of Jesus,
Right.
Peter, James, and John. And so it's maybe people they doubted. Maybe they read. And by the way, this is all the Gospels have the Transfiguration. At least I think the Synoptics ones do. And maybe there were some people saying, well, this heavenly glory and Moses and Elijah stuff, maybe that's just myth, exaggeration. It didn't actually happen. Well, Peter basically says, hey, we were there. We were eyewitnesses of that. We heard, the voice. We saw,
Yes.
And so that becomes the normative means to interpret the Transfiguration. No longer you can write it off as a myth, because the apostles who were there said, no, this is how it happened, right? And he says that that they have you do well to follow us like a lamp in a dark place. It becomes normative for understanding Scripture.
I looked it up. First chapter of 2 Peter.
See, that's why you're the great side.
Well, you knew, you were onto it.
No, I got Peter. I just didn't know which one.
Yeah. So the skeptic is still listening. I was surprised that we didn't have more skeptics call, actually, but it is the Friday before the 4th of July long weekend. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who are just in the car. They just want to listen and enjoy. And you are a very enjoyable person to listen to. But this
thanks.
fundamental problem of, even if I think that the Gospels are early and they were written by people who knew Jesus, how can you really be sure that Jesus taught this? So the skeptic who's driving to the summer vacation spot right now and listening says, Gary, I'm still not convinced. You got to give me more. Why would I believe that Jesus wasn't just, maybe the Bart Ehrman Jesus? He's just an itinerant preacher, maybe not even that well educated, and all this stuff just got imposed on him by people later.
Yeah. Actually, I'll give you a couple. One, I touch on this book, but I actually wrote a whole book called Hostile Witnesses.
Yeah.
Right. Throughout history, there were people who were skeptics, like maybe yourself or the interlocutor, who had it in their best interest to debunk this Jesus fellow and his followers, right, to see him fall. And they were there, and we have evidence of what they said. And like I point out in the book, and not just first century, but later, they don't discount the miracles. They don't say it's a fabrication. The best they can say is it's magic, or if they're Jewish, they would say that it's demonic or magic.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those two things.
But they don't say it didn't happen.
Right. They can't say it didn't happen. Why? Because, well, some of these people are still alive.
Yeah.
They can say, hey, look at me. This is what happened to me. So you have the people with that in their mind. The other thing too, and this is kind of what the Revolt from Reality book is if you see, okay, maybe this Jesus didn't do what he said. Maybe he was just a marginal Jew, like Meyer says, right?
Right.
How do you explain how the gospel revolutionizes Western civilization? Like, if the cause has to be at least equal to, if not greater than, the effect, right? So,
and the effect is so overwhelming. The transformation of the world by this message, I'm sorry that the music's playing, Gary. I could talk to you all day. Thanks. I really appreciate that you came in and did this with us. I want to say the book title and tell people where they can get it. And we can get it anywhere that you get Catholic books. It's Gary Michuda's book, The Gospel Truth, How We Can Know What Christ Taught. Get it and have a deepened confidence in the words of the Savior. Gary, thank you very, very much.
Hey, it's been a blast. Hi, thanks.
Coming up, Jimmy Akin, Open Forum, Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, heading into the big weekend. A lot of people. It'll be a big weekend for a lot of people who will take Monday off and make it a 4-day weekend because 4th of July is Tuesday. Time for what? What do people eat, Sarah, on the 4th of July? Hot dogs, you got it. Hamburgers, yes. Fireworks. They don't eat the fireworks, but all that's coming up. But we still have another great hour of Catholic Answers to do. Jimmy Akin is here, and we'll do an open forum with Jimmy. So go ahead and dial if you've got a question for Jimmy Akin. 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Thank you for coming back again, Jimmy Akin.
Yeah, my pleasure, Psych Elliott.
Okay, so today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, this was a Weird Questions Day, right?
Correct, yes. So you actually appear in the episode.
I love those. Those are my favorite episodes when I appear.
Yeah, cool.
Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, it was named before the new Star Trek series, Strange New Worlds. Do you feel like they maybe stole from you at all? Or
I have my lawyers looking into that.
Okay, I hope it's a good team of lawyers you've got on that. Put your best people on it. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-31-TRUTH. Do you watch the fireworks on 4th of July? Are you going to go out?
This 4th of July, probably not. I have other stuff happening next week.
Mm-hmm. I can see them from my house. Like they just shoot them off over my house. Actually, more and more people are doing their own fireworks here in California. This has become a new thing.
Good for them.
Yeah, I think I'm in a hotbed of fireworks scofflaws in my neighborhood because it's wild on the 4th of July, and these are not patient scofflaws either. It will start probably tonight, and it will get some sort of fireworks show every night till the 4th of July.
Yeah,
So,
I have always thought the restrictions on fireworks are excessive. I grew up in the 1970s, as I know you did, and in Arkansas, fireworks were totally legal. And so we would get fireworks every year and set them off in our yard, and nobody ever got hurt. And we never started any forest fires, I could understand some restrictions in some places, but having them basically be banned in California, except for cities using them is to put on citywide celebrations. It seems excessive to me.
yeah. Well, you would love my neighborhood then. You would love it. And they're better. Like, I do think, like, in the 70s, there was a lot of you would go. I think here you had to go over to Arizona to get your fireworks, but a lot of people did. Maybe it was Nevada. But they weren't the quality that they are today. These people, there's some high quality fireworks out there.
So what was your favorite firework?
I just liked them loud. I loved the sound of, like, the louder the better as far as I was concerned. How about you?
I liked several different ones. I liked Roman candles that would shoot off balls of colored flame.
Yeah.
Sparklers were a lot of fun because they were safe for kids and they made all the sparkles and you could wave them around. And I also liked ones called black cats, which were little black discs of charcoal, and you light them with a punt or something and they would catch fire and start growing, and they looked like black worms.
Did they make any sound, or they were? Because I don't think
Just a little hissing.
Oh yeah, because there was some that you could light and they would spin around in the street. I don't remember what those were called. I did like those. Yeah. 888-318-7884. If you'd like to share your fireworks story, reminiscence, you are welcome to. But also, you can ask Jimmy any question you want. We'll go to Boston, Massachusetts, where they have the big fireworks down by the Shell every year on the 4th of July. Been there a few times myself. Joseph, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks, gentlemen. My question is about the number of Catholic media entities and personalities, including some clergy, who have varying degrees of qualifications but are making claims about the state of the church. So my question is, to what degree is the salvation of a soul dependent on correctly identifying apostasy, heresies, or schism within the church or the curia?
Okay, so if one correctly identifies apostasy, heresy, or schism, then you know what to avoid. And that makes your journey to heaven safer. So it's going to help individuals if they correctly identify heresy, apostasy, and schism. If someone falsely identifies heresy or apostasy or schism and acts on that, then we have a bit of a second question to ask, which is how responsible are they for the error that they made? If someone is innocently ignorant, if they're in what's sometimes called invulnerable ignorance, then God will not hold their mistake against them. And so if they, let's say, go into schism because they falsely understood what schism is, or if they leave the church because they falsely think that someone is a heretic or an apostate, then they would not be they would not have that mistake held against them, but they would be in a state of objective sin, because they're no longer in the church, and that's objectively wrong, but they wouldn't be held accountable for it because they were innocently ignorant. But then there's the case where someone is not fully innocently ignorant, where they didn't display due diligence in coming to the conclusion that something was involved apostasy, heresy, or schism when it did not. And in that case, if they act on it and they say leave the church or go, otherwise go into schism, then they will be held accountable for it, and that would have a negative impact on their salvation potentially. So it is a very serious matter. It can involve either an objective grave sin that is not held against the person, or it can involve an objective grave sin that is held against the person if you are falsely identifying things as heresy, apostasy, or schism that are not. Fortunately, the church has quite clear definitions on what each of these involve. And unfortunately, many people today, especially on the internet, are completely ignoring what the church's definitions of them are and are twisting them to mean something other than what they mean. For example, I see a lot of people saying, oh, the church or the pope or this person is an apostate, when they are clearly not. Apostasy, according to the definition the church uses, is the total repudiation of the Christian faith. So as long as someone is willing to say, I'm a Christian, they are not an apostate. In order for someone to commit apostasy, they have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm not a Christian anymore at all. And so nevertheless, I see loads of people identifying much lesser offenses as if they were apostasy, and they're simply not. Also, I see a lot of people falsely overdiagnosing heresy. Heresy is something very specific. It is the post-baptismal refusal to accept a dogma of the faith. A dogma being a teaching that has been infallibly defined by the church to be divinely revealed. Not just to be true, it's not just a common opinion, it's something the church has used its power of infallibility to say specifically that it's divinely revealed. And I see lots of people flinging accusations of heresy that have nothing to do with that, where the church has never issued an infallible definition that the idea in question is divinely revealed. So I see numerous over-diagnoses of heresy by people who frankly should know better. I also see people under-diagnosing schism. Schism is and this is all Canon 751 of the Code of Canon Law, but schism is refusal of submission to the Roman Pontiff or the refusal of communion with those who are in communion with the Roman Pontiff. And I see some people saying, well, I don't think Francis is Pope, but I'm not a schismatic. Yes, you are. You are not giving submission to the Roman Pontiff if you are saying he's not Pope. And they may say something like, oh, well, if he was Pope or if there were a Pope, I would give submission to him. Yeah, that's not the question. The question is, are you giving submission to the Roman pontiff? And if you say there ain't one right now, you are not giving submission to the Roman pontiff. And you're just using a dodge. So I understand you may not recognize that you're in schism, but the fact is you are. But then schismatics never claim to be schismatic, no matter who they are. I'm not a schismatic, and heretics never claim to be a heretic. They claim I'm right in my views. The only people who may own the title that applies to them as apostates, who are like, well, yeah, I'm not a Christian anymore, so I'm an apostate, and I don't care. But I see lots of people, especially on the internet, underdiagnosing schism and overdiagnosing both heresy and apostasy, and I think they're leading a lot of people astray. And there is a danger here, because people who are not fully innocently ignorant will be held responsible for any negligence that they displayed in coming to these conclusions and acting on them. And that will endanger souls, and so as well as harming the church and harming the mission of Christ. So I think there are a lot of people out there, especially on the internet, who are acting gravely irresponsibly by making charges like this when they are simply mistaken. Joseph, if you'd like more information about this, you're here in the United States, so we can send you a copy of my book, Teaching with Authority, where I go into all this in great detail.
Hang on, Joseph. If you'd like the book, we'll get your address and send it to you. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
One time somebody said to me, why don't you air these people? And I said, no, because I don't think they're Catholic. He says, by what right do you have to say that? I said, I own the network.
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Every morning, 2 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, heading into the big holiday weekend here in the United States. And before we do, we got to say goodbye to somebody. You hear me talking to Sarah sometimes. Sarah gives us the groovy music when she remembers on Thursdays and does a great job. As a matter of fact, Sarah's been running all the equipment in the studio here. And I don't think we've ever recorded her making a mistake. I don't recall ever her making a mistake. And she does a bunch of other things for the apostolate. And I just wanted to say, because you're moving to a different country. You're moving to the Republic of Texas, correct?
Yes, correct.
So thanks for everything you've done, Sarah.
Thank you, Cy.
How long have you been here? How long have you been here?
Combined about 3 years.
But you started as an intern here.
I did, yes.
Yeah, because I remember one day there were all interns in the studio when I came out after the first hour. And I said, who's in charge if it's all interns? And every single other intern turned and said, her. And they all pointed at you.
I think I just happened to be the oldest one.
I don't think that was it. You have the air of competence about you. You're a very competent person. So what brought you here to Catholic Answers?
Well, I work here with my dad. I had gone away to school for a little bit, decided not to go back. He said he had some work for me to do, so I said, that sounds great. I'll make a little bit of money. And
so what does your dad do here?
He's the director of development.
That guy is your dad? Yes. David, the director of development, who also fill-in hosts on this show sometimes?
Yes.
Have you run the board when your dad's doing the
I have,
hosting?
yes.
Yeah? So it's a whole family affair in here.
Yeah.
Did you like it here at Catholic Answers?
Oh, absolutely.
You did?
Yes.
Would you tell me if you didn't? Or?
I would, yeah. No, I don't think I would.
So I Thank you for the honesty. You probably wouldn't.
No.
Well, I teased you about a month ago that before you left, I was going to make you host the show, and you just didn't seem very happy about
I
that.
probably went white.
Did you go? Yeah, you probably did go white. So I'm not going to make you do that.
Okay,
but I
thank
did
you.
want you to come in here because people hear about you all the time, and I just wanted to let people know that you were going. That's why they won't be hearing Sarah's name in here. Well, they might hear your name, but it'll be mostly because I'll be saying to other people, "Why can't you do it like Sarah did it?" That's going to come up.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what. Would you do me a favor before you go?
Sure.
Would you host the show for a minute and just say who the next caller is?
Absolutely. Yes.
And then say to them, "Thanks for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Aiken," and then I'll put them on.
Okay.
What line are they on?
Line one. Yep.
Okay. So when you're done, I'll do line one.
Okay.
All right. So you're hosting now. Go.
Okay. Our next caller is Stephen, calling from Matthews, Virginia. Stephen, go ahead with your question for Jimmy Aiken.
I knew you were going to be competent at every single job here. All right. Sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to get some speculation from Jimmy about alien life, intelligent, fallen, rational alien life. It's often said that the size of the universe could indicate that there must be life elsewhere. And then also I've heard Jimmy say that Jesus could have incarnated, or God the Son could have had other incarnations in other galaxies, other planets. But my question is, like, regardless of that, we still have Mary is the Earth's incarnation's mother, is exalted as the queen of like all the angels, queen of heaven, queen of the universe. So it seems that Earth has a very special relationship either way with God, and it seems that that could also mean that it could be the only place with rational life or fallen life. But then also just in general, what would that mean for the other incarnations' mothers? Like, why would they not be as exalted as the one from Earth? And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just wanted to see Jimmy's thoughts on that.
Okay, so you specified that this is fallen intelligent alien life, and it wouldn't impact the Catholic faith or the Christian faith itself, because the faith has no teaching on this. So it wouldn't falsify anything about the faith if it turned out that there are fallen intelligent creatures elsewhere. And what would happen with them? Well, we don't know. First thing I'm going to do is recommend an episode of Jimmy Aiken's Mysterious World to you, where I go through all these implications in a lot of detail. It's episode 55. So you can get to it by going to mysterious.fm/55. And it'll give you much more detail than I can go into at the moment. But it could, in summary form, it could be that this fallen race is so fallen that they don't get redeemed. It could also be that God redeemed them in some way. And according to St. Thomas Aquinas, God has liberty to redeem people in any way he chooses, including just by saying, okay, you're all redeemed now. He chose to use the incarnation and death of his son in our case. He may have chosen something similar in their cases. He could send God the Son to other planets and have incarnations there. That's also something. Not other planets, but other incarnations is something that St. Thomas Aquinas talks about. And he says basically God's omnipotent. So God can do what he chooses in regard to incarnations. It would be possible for God the Son to incarnate in other bodies. It would be possible for the Father and the Holy Spirit to incarnate in other bodies. And there are other variations he goes into, but he would say it's quite possible. That's a standard opinion of St. Thomas. Then there's the question of Mary's status, and it's true that we apply the term Queen of Heaven to Mary. The thing is, though, we tend to associate queenship with there being one queen. And that's because in Christian society, we practice monogamy. So a man has only one queen. If a man has only one wife, and if the man is a king, he's only got one queen. But in Israelite society, there could be multiple queens at the same time. And so I can't rule out hypothetically, since I don't know what God would do with alien races. I don't know that alien races even exist. But if they exist, God could choose to have co-queenship among different mothers of different incarnations of the Son. At least that's a hypothetical possibility, meaning it does not contain a logical contradiction. The terms involved do not contradict each other. And so it's within the power of God's omnipotence to bring it about. And I have to leave it to him to decide what he actually has brought about. And I don't have the data to assert any opinion over any other opinion. I can just sketch out what some of the options are.
Okay, thank you for your call, Stephen. I hope that helped.
Nice job, Sarah. See ya. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you,
I know
Si.
this wasn't the most comfortable moment of your life, but I'm so glad
No,
you
it's
came
been
in
an absolute
and we got to
pleasure.
say goodbye to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to you for always making my time here in the studio enjoyable. I've always really enjoyed being in here and working with everyone here, but you, Si, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Wow. All right, we should just go to a commercial while I tear up, probably. Well, I don't have time to go to a commercial. Let's go to Katie in San Francisco. That's so nice, Sarah. Thank you. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
San Francisco, California. Katie, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Oh, hello. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Sarah.
She
so
said,
Mr.
thank you,
Aiken, this is
Sarah.
kind of a weird...
Go ahead.
Well, this is kind of a weird question, but so walking down the street the other day, we see a priest in uniform, and my dad says, "Oh, he's Eastern Orthodox." I say, "How do you know?" He says, "It's the beard." And so I'm wondering, and then I noticed so most of the Roman Catholic priests they have shaven beards, but a lot of those in the Byzantine or the Eastern Catholic Church or even the Eastern Orthodox Church they have these big long beards. Is there some sort of rule about that, or how did that happen? Or why did that happen?
So hair grooming customs vary over time and in different locations, and there are various reasons for that, some of which have been studied by sociologists. One of the things they find is they tend to go in cycles. So for a while, having a short beard will be fashionable, then having a longer beard will be fashionable, then it'll go back to short beards are fashionable, then it'll go back to clean shaven is fashionable, and it tends to oscillate between different lengths of facial hair. Mustaches also can go through cycles like that, and women's hemlines do. They've observed the same thing happening. Sometimes hemlines are very short, then they start getting longer and longer and longer and longer, but they can't get too long because the woman will start tripping over them if they get too long, and so then they go move in the other direction and start getting shorter and shorter again. And you can follow these social trends through surveys and other means and document that they just change over time. And that's true of facial hair in different groups. Now, there is no rule that prohibits Latin Rite priests from having beards. In fact, I know many of them that do. Father Pacwa on EWTN has a beard. Padre Pio, who's a saint now, he had a beard, and he was a Capuchin. He was here in the West. So there are bearded Catholic priests. It tends in the West to just be a matter of personal choice, what your facial hair length is going to be. In terms of Eastern priests, whether they're Eastern Catholics or Eastern Orthodox, I've observed the same thing, that they tend to have beards, often longer ones. What I don't know is, in their case, is there any rule? And it might be that in an individual group of priests, like let's say at a monastery, there might be a rule. We're all at this monastery, as part of our habit, we're going to wear beards of X length. That could be the case, but I don't have any documentation to show that's the case. So it's also, as far as I know, it's also possible that it's just a matter of culture of the local monastery or the local order or the local, church to have priests with beards of a given length or not, because people also tend to fit in. with those who are around them. And so if you join a monastery and all the guys got long beards, you may grow a long beard too, just to fit in. And so it can be not something that's a matter of rules, but just a matter of human psychology.
Katie?
Oh, thank you so much. Nice beard, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You know, that's funny, Katie. I thought that was going to be your question. I thought you might be going to ask Jimmy if he was Orthodox, but no. You went a different direction. Thank you, Katie. I look forward to talking with you again sometime. The number here is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and that means not only are we open to anyone, whether you are a believer or not, whether you're a Christian, a Catholic, or anything else, your question is welcome, but it also means we're really open to anything because Jimmy's happy to take your question, whatever it is. 888-318-7884. Are you ready to defend your faith in a world of unbelief? Join us at the 9th Annual Catholic Answers Apologetics Conference. This year's theme, I Believe in God, and it'll help you provide clear and charitable answers to atheism, agnosticism, and plain old indifference. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us in San Diego from September 21st through 24th as we welcome our special guest, Dr. Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of great Catholic speakers. Spend quality time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and enjoy 4 days of fun, fellowship, and adoration of the Almighty. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register. Enter promo code EARLY and save $50. That's CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. This Independence Day weekend, there's a big sale over at shop.catholic.com, 25% off any purchase of $25 or more. 25% off any purchase of $25 or more when you use promo code USA25 at checkout. Check it all out at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour, a little bit of bonus open forum for you on a Friday afternoon. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, you're welcome to call. If you have a question about anything else, you're welcome to call. 888-318-7884. We go now up to Ontario, Canada, where Ava is on the line. Ava, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Ava, I'm very sensitive to tone of voice, and you sound older. Did you get older recently?
I did. I turned 16 a couple of days ago.
Well, happy birthday again, Ava. Thanks for the call. Go ahead with your question for Mr. Akin.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for wishing me a happy birthday with the flannel panel.
You're very welcome. Your dad put us up to that.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Ava, go ahead.
All right, my question is, do people have personalities, do people have the same personalities they did on Earth when they get to heaven, since personalities are combinations of people's likes and dislikes and flaws in their opinions? So if when they're in heaven they're perfect and they have a perfect personality, does that mean everyone has a very similar personality since they're all perfect, or would they have a personality that is like their old personality on Earth?
At least the way the church conceptualizes this, there are, for example, patron saints of different things. Like, St. Ambrose is patron saint of Milan because he used to live in Milan. And St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland because he evangelized Ireland. And there are bunches of others as well. And to the extent that this patron saint phenomenon accurately reflects what a saint's interests are, we would presumably be able to infer that, St. Patrick has a special interest in Ireland. He cares for the Irish people in a special way because he evangelized them. And St. Ambrose cares for the people of Milan in a special way because he used to be their bishop. Now, obviously, being perfect, they love everybody. But that's not inconsistent with them having a special concern and a special interest in praying for the people who are under their patronage. And so if that's true, now the church does not have a teaching on this, so what I'm engaging in right now is theological speculation. But I would assume that patron saints either natively have or acquire a special interest in those who turn to them for their patronage, and thus that would reflect a personality difference. St. Patrick would have a special interest in praying for people from Ireland, and St. Ambrose wouldn't have that. Now, they both pray for everybody. St. Patrick would pray for Milanese people, and St. Ambrose would pray for Irish people, but it would seem that they have a special interest in those who turn to them regularly for their prayers. We also have no evidence that our personalities are going to be wiped. We're told that we're going to be like Jesus, but that doesn't mean that it's going to override all of our preferences and everything like that, because there are multiple things that are compatible with holiness. You can be perfectly loving, which is what holy is, and you might still prefer chocolate ice cream over vanilla or strawberry, or you might prefer strawberry ice cream over chocolate or vanilla. So we don't have evidence that our personalities are, and all of our preferences and things like that, are going to be the same. What we do know is we'll be perfected in love, and so we'll be perfectly loving people, but that doesn't mean we won't have personal preferences based on our memories and our experiences and our choices. So I would say that even though the church doesn't have a teaching on this, I would not view it as likely that there will be no differences in people's personalities. I would expect personality differences to continue.
Okay, Eva?
Okay, thank you. Because I've heard of different saints, like Saint Teresa, having a sense of humor, and so I was wondering if that would be possible.
Yeah, I'd say that's possible. Some people have more of a sense of humor than others, and as long as the person is perfectly loving in heaven, they may express that love in humor more than someone else does.
Ava, thank you very, very much. I almost wished Ava a happy 4th of July weekend, but they don't do that up there in Ontario. Sorry, Ava. I know you're a Commonwealth country. Dave in Billings, Montana, you are next. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, good afternoon, Jimmy. How you doing?
Doing okay. What's your question?
My question is about Islam. We have a friend of ours who was married to a Muslim who fathered her child. I love her child, but he disappeared. This is back in Minnesota. She lives here in Billings, Montana now. So I got a copy of the Quran. I've had it for quite a while. It's not
Dave, I'm not really sure what your question is. Could you put it in the form of a question, please?
My question: Allah is their God. Is Allah a devil or an angel?
Neither. Allah is simply the Arabic word for God, and it's used by Arabic-speaking Christians for God. What Muslims believe Allah is the creator of the universe, and they believe that he appeared to Abraham, and that he's God and the only God. And about all that, they're right. There is only one God. He created the universe, and he appeared to Abraham. So that doesn't mean Muslims have a complete understanding of God. They have some incomplete knowledge of him. They also have some mistakes in their understanding of God, but okay, nobody has complete knowledge of God, because his mystery is infinite and our brains are finite. The Jewish people also, they didn't know God was a Trinity before the time of Christ, but they were still worshiping God. Jesus tells the disciples, you believe in God, believe also in me. And so, Jewish people could worship God without knowing he's a Trinity. And people can have mistakes in their understanding of God. In fact, almost everybody does, because we all have experiences that color our perception of God in ways that may not be accurate. If someone grew up in an abusive family with an abusive father figure, let's say emotionally abusive, or could be physically abusive, then they're likely to project the image of their father on God and misunderstand God's love and his mercy. But that doesn't mean they're not capable of talking to God or praying to God, or that the person they're worshiping in heaven isn't really God. So Muslims have incomplete and inaccurate knowledge about God, but they have a fundamentally correct understanding of God, which is that there is only one God. He created the universe and he appeared to Abraham. They're right about all that. And so when they address their prayers to the creator of the universe who appeared to Abraham, God knows that they are talking to him. And in Arabic, they use the word Allah to refer to God. That's true whether it's an Arabic-speaking Christian or an Arabic-speaking Muslim. Also, in Aramaic, the Aramaic word for God was Elah. It was the same basic word, it's just pronounced a little differently. So when Jesus and the apostles talked about God, they would have been talking about Elah. And so God, Allah, or God, is not an angel or a devil. He's a deity, and he's the only deity. And this is not a new modern view. This is, St. Thomas Aquinas would say the same thing. This is the standard view in Christian history.
Dave, thank you. I'm going to leave that there and keep moving, try to get as many on as I can as we near the end here with Jimmy this afternoon. I'm going to go to Donald in New Jersey. Donald, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Cy. Hi, Jimmy. I was wondering, the Pope has showed a lot of favor towards women, but he says he doesn't want ordination of women. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, what if someday women could be priests? And I said, no, I've had it. I'm going to quit the church. Would I be a apostate then? Because I can see even more of a loss of attendance if women become priests.
Okay, so we had covered the definition of apostasy, heresy, and schism earlier in the show. Apostasy is the total repudiation of the Christian faith. So if you said, I'm leaving Christianity, I am no longer a Christian, then yes, you would be an apostate. But if you just said, I'm done being an active Catholic, I'm just going to stay at home on Sundays, well, you would still be a Catholic. You'd be a backslidden Catholic, but you'd still be a Catholic. If you said, I'm going to leave the Catholic Church, but otherwise remain a Christian, you would be a schismatic. Now, I think you should not worry about this scenario, because John Paul II taught that the church is already infallibly defined that women cannot be ordained to the priesthood. It is a not infallibly settled question as to whether they could be ordained to the diaconate, but it's already been infallibly defined that they can't be ordained to the priesthood. So that's not going to happen, and you're causing yourself unnecessary stress and possibly alienating yourself from the church and harming your spiritual life if you worry about something that's never going to happen. Even if there was someone in the future who tried to ordain women, well, that's already happened. There have already been rogue bishops who've tried to ordain women, and none of those ordinations are valid. And so even if invalid ordination of women to the priesthood occurred on a larger scale in the future, that would be no reason to leave the church. And so one could remain a Catholic and just say, well, this bad thing's going on, but I don't approve of it, and I'm not going to let it destroy my spiritual life, which is always the correct response. Do not let what other people do destroy your spiritual life, or such as by causing you to quit the church. Quitting the church is always a mistake, no matter what others have done or are doing. So the thing to do, even if there were invalid ordinations of women to the priesthood in the future, would be to stay where you are and continue to live as a Catholic and pray for the people who were involved in the invalid ordinations. But worrying about it now, when it's not even happening, is something that's only going to be destructive of your spiritual life and corrosive of your peace in the church. And you're hurting yourself by worrying about things unnecessarily. So don't hurt yourself. Put it out of your mind and don't worry about it.
Donald, I will leave it there. We got to take a break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her two children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, what are you here for?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour, and it's Open Forum, and a whole bunch of folks on the line for Jimmy. So back we go to the phones to Caitlin in Cleveland, Ohio. Caitlin, thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. So I know I've heard Jimmy talk in the past about like ghosts and the supernatural and stuff. And if I recall correctly, he said that if you were to like encounter a ghost or one were to appear to you, you have to test it to see if it's like truly the person who's like is claiming to be. So I guess my question is like, how would you go about doing that?
Well, so the testing takes place in a couple of different ways. It really depends on the situation. I mean, so the New Testament contains, and this is reflected both in the writings of St. Paul and St. John, but it's specifically St. John who says, do not believe every spirit, not every spirit is of God, but test the spirits. And you can look that up. That's 1 John 4, the beginning of 1 John 4. So the context in which St. John is talking, and also the one in which St. Paul is talking, is about getting information from spirits that would pertain to religious topics. Like if, you're in a first century church and there's a prophet who is in contact with spirits and the spirits are giving the prophet prophecies, well, that's when you need to test them for those purposes. If you're in a different situation, if someone is just reporting experiencing a ghost in their house and they think maybe it's the person who used to live in the house or something like that, then they wouldn't really probably be giving you information of a religious nature. And so you might test them in this circumstance to see, do we have evidence that an actual ghost is involved in this situation? And there are various techniques that paranormal investigators use to try to determine if a reported apparition, and that's the term that gets used in parapsychology for appearances of ghosts, it's the same term that the church uses for appearances of souls of the saints and of those in purgatory. So if you have a report of an apparition occurring in a house, there are tests you can do to try to eliminate natural causes. If you find that, let's say the people in the house are hearing footsteps, human footsteps, and they hear them every night at 10:30 p.m. Well, okay, one of the things you want to do is consider, could there be a natural explanation for the footsteps they're hearing? And sometimes there is. I know of a case where at the same time, I know the investigator who covered this case, where every night at a certain time, the family in this house was hearing what sounded like human footsteps. And it sounded like they were coming from the attic. So he staked out the attic. And he stayed up there. He got up there before the appointed time for the footsteps, and he waited. And then at the appointed time, here comes a squirrel that's gathering nuts in the attic. And as the sound of the squirrel is distorted through the floorboards of the attic, it sounds like human footsteps to the people in the house below. And they're shouting up going, hey, are you okay? We're hearing the footsteps. And it was just a squirrel. So what competent parapsychological investigators do is they make a list of everything that could explain the different phenomena that are being reported, and then they go through and investigate, does a natural thing explain these different phenomena? And sometimes they do, like in the squirrel footsteps case that I just mentioned. If it turns out that there is no good natural explanation for all of the phenomena, then it becomes reasonable to propose that we are dealing with something paranormal here. We're dealing with a real ghost. And one can try to speak to the ghost, one can make contact with it, one can ask it questions, one can test the ghost's knowledge. You know, if the ghost is saying, if you need to, you can say, okay, so tell me about the history of this house. And if the ghost is able to accurately describe the history of the house and you can verify what it says, well, that gives you at least some reason to think that the ghost may be the former inhabitant of the house. That doesn't prove it, because people can impersonate other people even in this life. But, you know, Cy Kellett could be a total imposter. You know, he could be a pod person for all I know. I can't prove that that's not the case. But as long as I don't have evidence that he is an imposter, I assume that Cy Kellett is who he appears to be. And so in the case of a ghost, if they appear to be who they are, you know, like if they're the former inhabitant of the house and they know the history of the house, until you get contrary evidence, you should assume that's who they are. But if you get contrary evidence, like if they start telling you things like, hey, you know what, you really need to go worship the god Baal. Well, okay, now you've got a problem, because the ghost is saying something that is flatly contradicted by the Christian faith, and they may be an imposter. They may, in fact, be a demon. But you need evidence to propose that it's a demon. You don't just assume things are demons. The authors of the New Testament did not tell us to assume that things are demons. They said to test the spirits and see if they're of God. They didn't say assume every spirit is a demon. So they expect us to use testing when it's reasonable. And certainly if a ghost starts making religious claims, that's when the major form of testing needs to be done. Of, is this what this ghost is claiming consistent with the Christian faith, or is this a deceiving spirit?
Caitlin, thank you. I'm going to leave that there. I hope that was helpful to you. I am not a pod person, just so that you know.
Well, that's exactly what a pod person would say.
Oh, I knew there was going to be a twist. Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. Joe's in Northern Kentucky. We're glad you're here, Joe. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Like the show, Jimmy, like Mysterious World. Quick question for you. If a grandparent, for example, and this has not happened, decides that they are worried about a grandchild, being baptized, and they secretly baptize that child out of concern that something could happen, and then the parents kind of come around and they get back to the faith and they decide to take the child and have them baptized. Has the parents' baptism caused a conflict with a church baptism?
Okay, so number one, the natural law right of parents to make decisions about their children's baptism must be respected. So grandparents cannot secretly baptize their children. It is against church law to do that. So this should not happen. The only exception is if the child is in danger of death. Not just, the child maybe could die someday. If the child is in imminent danger of death, then they can be baptized even against the parents' will. But as long as the child is not in imminent danger of death, they must not be baptized. Having said that, if a grandparent broke the law and baptized the child again, anyway, in secret, then when the parents go to have the child baptized in church, the grandparent needs to speak up and fess up and say, I already baptized this child in secret. And that's going to throw a big wrench in the church baptism, and the parents are probably going to be mad at the grandparent, and justly so, because the grandparent not only baptized the child against their wishes, but the grandparent also is now caused a big problem where we're not going to be able to baptize this baby in church because it's already been baptized secretly. So this is, apart from danger of death, this is a bad idea, and I would recommend it not happen.
And again, I'm going to leave that there and see if we can get everybody on with Jimmy. Thank you very much, Joe. Tim's in Idaho. Tim, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, hey, Jimmy. My question is, if a priest is an exorcist and does an exorcism on a victim, if you will, I don't know what to call him, but that is not accept. Hello?
No. Yep.
You are on the air, Tim. Go on with your question.
Oh, yeah. So if the priest is exorcising someone who doesn't want to be exorcised, is that an effective? I don't know. I don't think it's a sacrament, but is it effective?
It may or may not be. The consent. Now we have to distinguish between how exorcisms are normally done today, and normally you do have if you're having a private exorcism done, you normally have the person's consent, but it's not required that happen for an exorcism to take place. There are involuntary exorcisms that take place, and we even see them in the New Testament. For example, in Acts chapter 16, St. Paul encounters a young woman who has a spirit of Python that is enabling her to predict the future. And she keeps calling out after Paul and his party that these men will show you a way of eternal salvation, which actually is good advertising for the gospel, but it's annoying St. Paul. Now, the text doesn't say that this spirit of Python is a demon, but it does say that, and it would be a little strange for a demon to be saying, hey, go to these guys to get eternal salvation. That would be a little strange for a demon to do. So this may be some weird kind of spirit that doesn't fit neatly into our modern categories. But we are told that St. Paul was annoyed by what this spirit was doing, and he exorcised it. And it wasn't, with the consent of the girl. He just said, come out of her. And it did. And we see similar cases where Jesus orders spirits out of people, and there's no seeming consent by the person who's being exorcised. So it is possible to exorcise people without consent, but these days it's generally done with consent.
Tim, thank you for being quick and clear with your question there so we could get it in before the end. But you can hear the music, and that means we are coming to an end. Jimmy Akin, thank you very much for another very fine hour.
My pleasure, Psych Elliott.
And Weird Questions drop today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Go to Mysterious FM and check it out. that does it for us. We will be right back here doing this again on Monday. Not a pre-record, nothing. We'll just be back here doing our job, and we'll see you then, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.